Good morning, and welcome to our live webinar on LGBTQ plus advocacy under attack, the case of Ghana. This event is hosted by the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Diplomacy at the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs of Florida International University, and also made possible by our co-sponsors, the Ruth K. and Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series, the African and African Diaspora Studies Program, the Center for Conflict Studies at Phillips University Marburg, and Human Rights Watch. We thank each of them for their generous support and participation. My name is Ofelia Riqueses. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator of the Havel Program, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. The recent arrest and detention of 21 Ghanaian LGBTQ plus rights activists highlight the country's laws criminalizing same-sex conduct and the rampant homophobia common throughout Ghanaian society. Gay and gender nonconforming individuals face the constant threat of discrimination, abuse, and violence. Today, in the second installment of the Havel Program series, LGBTQ plus rights as human rights, we will explore the history of LGBTQ plus activism in Ghana and the events that led to the current hostile situation towards grassroots activists. The conversation will provide a comparative insight on the notion of cultural relativism about sexual orientation and its relationship to government policies, laws, and societal norms. We will have the pleasure of listening to what is sure to be a fascinating conversation between experts Robert Akoto Amoafo, Mariel Rice, Wendy Isaac, and Danny Vidiaco. We are thrilled to have you all with us. I am now pleased to introduce our moderator for today's session. Dr. Jessie Abu-Arab is a visiting assistant professor at the FIU Center for Women's and Gender Studies. She holds a PhD in international relations, majoring in foreign policy and security studies in the Middle East, and specializing in women's and gender studies. Thank you for joining us and for leading this conversation, Jessie.
Thank you, Ophelia, for the introduction. I would like to start right on point, starting with Mr. Robert. You are the former country director of Amnesty International in Ghana, and you are currently the president of the Alliance for Equality and Diversity. So basically, you're the country expert on LGBTQI plus rights within that country. According to our Afrobarometer in Ghana, it places it amongst the 20th least tolerable countries. Nearly 90% of Ghanaians shared that they would report a daughter, a relative, a friend, co-worker to the police if they knew or even they suspected they're engaging in LGBTQ activities, which are basically considered under the law as deviant in an unnatural manner. Could you trace the history of this heteronationality in Ghana and the current queer panic happening today that is leading civilians to take matters in their own hands, along governmental groups performing all sorts of homophobic violence and acts of dehumanization towards fellow citizens from sexual minorities? I would appreciate you to give us some background, explaining the situation in Ghana on a legal, cultural, political level, which led to this current hostile situation towards the human rights activists. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Jessie, for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm happy that we have this opportunity to have a conversation about Ghana, especially at this time when Ghana is the newest African country proposing a specific law to legalize LGBT in Ghana, and a number of things also. So I would first, like you mentioned, I'll first talk about a number of background issues, the legal, the political, the cultural, as well as religion and cultural issues. And first of all, to introduce Ghana to you, Ghana is a country in West Africa, a very beautiful country with beautiful people, a very diverse group of people from various ethnic groups in Ghana. One of the key things you cannot take from Ghana is religion. Religion is very big. Our last census showed that about 71% of Ghanaians are Christians, and about 98% of all Ghanaians belong to one religion or another. So religion plays a very key role in Ghana. Ghanaians also pride themselves a lot in the issue of culture. the idea that they belong to one culture or another, and the pride in showing off what kind of culture they belong to. So it's a key thing that I want to bring to bear as we discuss the issues of LGBT and human rights issues. Now, LGBT people in Ghana face a lot of discrimination, human rights abuse, and violence. This is stemmed in the various issues that we've mentioned already, and I'll start with the legal. So Ghana has a Criminal Offences Act, which lists all the crimes in Ghana and what punishments are supposed to go for which crime. In our sexual offences part of the law, it's mentioned something in section 104 of the Criminal Act. Sometimes we call it the Criminal Offences Act and sometimes Criminal Code. And in that law, we find something called unnatural carnal knowledge. Now, though there is no specific national definition to it, over the time, it has been interpreted to mean same-sex activities, especially which has an element of penetration. So, vaguely, and to lose language, we would say that if a person uses the male sexual organ to penetrate any part of the body of another person apart from the female sexual organ, then that will be an offense according to our Criminal Offences Act. So that is the first part of the law that criminalizes LGBT people. Now, to bring it back to where it's the law is friendly. Now, our Constitution in Chapter 5 of the 1992 Constitution gives all the human rights that everybody is entitled to. And one of the key things that we realize is that it mentions that all persons shall have all these human rights that are listed in our Constitution. Therefore, in our interpretation, it means that it doesn't matter who you are, gay, lesbian, bisexual, black, white, whatever your color may be, you are entitled to all these human rights that are enlisted in the Constitution. Unfortunately, this is not true for LGBT people, especially when they are perceived or their real sexual orientation is discovered by a community or by their family or by their parents or by their schools. In the past, we have seen schools sending out over 90 students per time out of school because they are perceived to be gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So the issue of education and the idea that once you are found out in school to be LGBT, you could be expelled. Also, people are blackmailed. So we have Grindr and all this, the apps that you can talk about. But immediately, sometimes people take advantage of these apps, and scrupulous people take advantage of this app, meet LGBT people, and harm them in one way or the other. The sad thing about this is also the idea that when the issues are reported to the police do not handle it in the way that you would expect. Once a person is identified as LGBT, it doesn't matter if the person is reported as a victim, that person will be penalized. And though most of the times, the cases that I have handled personally, these people are not sent to court and the processes do not go through. But the police find ways to either extort money or just keep the people in cells just to penalize them for being gay or bisexual or transgender or lesbian. One key thing to mention is that the role of religion in this process. Now, religious, as I mentioned before, religion is a big thing in Ghana, and almost every religious group finds a way to continue to promote hate speech and hate crime and violence against the LGBT community. For hate speech, especially within the Christian religion, there's always this bad speech against LGBT people being demonic. The conversion therapy is a very big thing. A lot of people have to go through this conversion therapy. And sometimes people have to take themselves through because they don't even understand the whole idea of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so they go through this whole conversion therapy. So religion plays a key role, especially with groups forming now. Now we have a group called Proper Sexual Rights and Family Values Coalition. And what they are doing is leading the religious front, fighting against LGBT people and the protection of their rights. Cultural issues also play a key role. Now, people bring about to say, Ghana, our culture does not support this. Our culture does not support LGBT people. There's nowhere in our culture where LGBT is seen or is something that is there. But it's interesting that some of our discussions is that We never made a law as a country on our own to criminalize LGBT people. Our law is a colonial law that was brought into being by the British. It's a law that was made in 1960 and still exists, just a few years after our independence. So that should tell you how this law plays a very key role in the process. One of the important things I also want to bring to bear is that LGBT people, a lot of LGBT people in Ghana are not able to properly identify and do not understand the string of sexual orientation and gender identity, which goes a lot of time against the community. Why is this so? Because a lot of the time, like in the US and other countries, and especially in Africa, comprehensive sexuality education, which could have helped people to understand sexuality and help them to understand the issues of being gay or being lesbian or whatever it is not in our education system. So people have to struggle on their own, and therefore when they sometimes do not understand who they are, people take advantage of them. You know?
Definitely, because they don't provide them the space, right? Within
Yes,
the community.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So that plays a very key role.
Thank you, Robert. And on that point, which you referred to regarding religion and whatnot, right? Here, Danny, as the executive director of Ratify Ghana, which is the human rights organization that focuses on advocacy for what you were saying, Robert, LGBTQ plus rights, regarding health, psychosocial care, all these stuff that Ghanaian lack. You have basically, Danny, witnessed this tragedy firsthand. Those 16 women and 5 men, they were arrested due to unlawful assembly, which the government labeled. They were denied 3 times bail, right? You witnessed it firsthand. They were attending your organization's training session regarding how to share insights on documenting, reporting human rights violations, right, up to international standards that most of the LGBTQ plus Ghanaian communities were witnessing. So on several occasions, you highlighted the role on how the church plays an important role in promoting the dehumanization of LGBTQ plus persons within Ghana, right? From the Catholic, um, you know, uh, figures within Ghana, they encourage hate speeches, resulting in increased discrimination and violence towards the community. And again, they were not alone. As you mentioned before, they had national and transnational coalitions, such as the National Coalition for Proper Human Sexual Rights and Family Values that was created in Ghana. And also they were sponsored by foreign basically networks, which are, some of them are US-based network, which is considered hate institution, such as World Congress of Families, where they encourage spying, blackmailing, even planning on attacking LGBTQ plus citizen or anybody who is suspected to be part of that community. So in your experience with the recent draft of the anti-gay legislation that's been submitted recently and was leaked to the parliament, that they pitched it to the parliament on proposing 10 years of jail for any person from the LGBTQ plus community or individuals that advocate for them or expresses activism for human rights regarding those issues or show sympathy could have. So could you provide us some context on how your community, the LGBT community, the activism and the resiliency efforts were affected by these situations? What are some of the important factors that the government or policymakers are not paying attention to that you'd like to highlight? Danny, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you see?
My apologies for the internet connections. It's hard. Um, maybe we can move it to Wendy or anybody would like to interject regarding that point until Danny's connection is set?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here, Jesse. I think first of all, just to add a couple of things to what Robert has said. Human Rights Watch, we did research in Ghana in 2017, specifically looking at the impact of the Section 104 of the Criminal Offences Act. What we found was that while the law was in place, it was rarely implemented, in fact, if at all. There were no prosecutions and no arrests on the basis of the provision in the Criminal Offences Act. But what we did find was that there's a high level of violence and abuse within communities and by family members. And the most affected individuals were lesbian and bisexual women who were suffering at the hands of family members, being subjected to, many of them being subjected to forced marriages. And Robert already made mention of conversion therapy. Some were taken to churches for this kind of conversion therapy. So what's very troubling with this new bill that's been proposed, and I believe the first reading of the bill will be on Monday, what is very troubling is that it in fact legislates for conversion therapy. I mean, there are many troubling things with the bill. One person I interviewed when I was in Ghana for 2 weeks said this bill contains almost every single provision that a homophobic person can dream up. Everything is in there, everything is criminalized. Now, in relation to the 21, and I'm glad that you pointed out, Jesse, that 16 of the 21 individuals were lesbian and bisexual women. I was in Ghana for 2 weeks, and the purpose of my visit was to do in-depth interviews with these individuals, to get a sense of what happened, what led to the arrest, what were the conditions in detention. And I was very lucky to be able to do in-depth interviews with 14 of them. I'll be completing my interviews with the other 7 from Johannesburg. I had to return to Johannesburg. Now, I know Danny has studied the bill carefully, every provision, and I'll leave that to him to discuss. What I want to emphasize here is the violations, or rather the abuses that LGBT people are subjected to prior to the closure of the office in February and the arrest of the 21 were at the hands of private individuals, family members, members of the community. In fact, we observed that some police officers, senior police officers, and the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice in Ghana was working closely with several members of the LGBT community in terms of providing support and training. And so the developments this year are just incredibly shocking because there isn't a history of that necessarily. I think Dan is now online, so I'll let him respond to your question and I can come back in later.
No, for sure. Basically, okay. So we will continue with your chain of thought, Wendy. But when it comes to you, Danny, could you give us some context on community activism in Ghana, given those harsh situation, and given that the community, basically family members, friends, and neighbors are implicated in these discriminatory practices that kind of pushes them to hide and not show resiliency in a positive light, informing others, raising awareness about the things that affect the LGBTQ plus community, the things that the policymaker governments are not paying attention to?
Yeah, sorry. Hello. Okay, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem. It happens. Go ahead.
All right. Nice to be here, and I do apologize. I was having some challenges with the internet. And I also want to apologize on behalf of the queer community in Ghana. This is not us. It is very shameful what is going on. We were seen as a beacon of democracy, a country of rule of law, respecting civil liberties. But then whatever is happening is something that it seems we lie to the world about, that people seem we were progressive, but whatever is happening or the events that have unfolded this year seems to tell everyone that we were indeed lying, because it doesn't really exist here. And on the resilience of the community, for years, the queer community has been seen as non-existent in the Ghanaian society. So even for policymakers, there haven't been any attempt to draw or implement any policies that target the community as to protect our rights or fight some of the, or tackle some of the violence that our community members face. So it came to a time where community members started our own kind of initiatives. And activism seems to have started with when HIV and AIDS program came in, and there were components that were focusing on men who have sex with men. And it had a lot of people who belong to that population being empowered. And through that, some of them became activists and started some groups and organizations. And it has gotten to a time where I think about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a project in Ghana where queer-led organizations were brought together to implement a project called the Ghana Pride Project. And under this project, there were about 9 or 10 organizations, and they were diverse. And it's led to the strengthening of organizational leadership on how to manage organizations, and other processes activities were also, some activities were also focused on community members, empowering community members. So we had some organization providing human rights education, security and safety trainings. There were also activities focusing on entrepreneurship. So these are some of the activities that, because policymakers and governments have seemed to behave or try to want everyone to believe that we don't exist, so they don't have any policies that target us. And we took it upon ourselves as a community to start initiatives to solve our own problems or find solutions to our problems. With resilience, even though we know Ghana is very, very homophobic, organizations have braved homophobia in the country. That we do operate, we do exist, and we do provide services to our community. So we are trying to be resilient and then braving what is going on. And also there have been activities to increase visibility. Some time ago, when you look at the community, it was hard for us to have certain spaces to even have our own discussions and exist or try to be visible, because the environment was very hostile, or is still even hostile. So social media came on board, and it has become a tool that is helping activists resist any form of homophobia. So that homophobia that would have made us go back into hiding, social media has provided us with a platform for community members and organizations to exist. And also there have been other progressive spaces. There are some organizations, even though they are not queer organizations, because they are progressive, they provide spaces for queer organizations to hold their activities. So it is part of the resilience that has been built. And also there have been an increased engagement with some state organizations. For example, there have been engagements with the Ghana AIDS Commission, for example, and SHRAJ, and the police, also some persons in the police, there have been activities that have targeted them. It is part of the resilience that we have built, to the extent that if someone is facing some kind of abuse, some organizations do work with SRAJ to document some of these cases. So instead of walking to the police stations ourselves, we sometimes work with the SRAJ so that the police would listen, because sometimes people fear walking straight to the police station, but because SRAJ is a state human rights body, they listen in a way. The police listen to them. And also, there have been attempts by the queer community to change narrative. That is also part of our resilience that we have built. So now we see organizations releasing press releases. In February, when LGBT plus Rights Ghana office was closed or shut down by the police, they released a statement. And it was part of a way of changing narratives, because the media spaces, or the traditional media spaces, has been historically not favorable to the queer community. They don't really allow us. When a queer issue comes, instead of calling maybe some professional like a psychologist, a doctor, or a scientist to speak on gender and sexual orientation issues, a pastor or a reverend minister is what the person, or is the personality the media would normally call to make a comment or talk about gender and sexual orientation, which is not right. And they would release a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of propaganda, lies, and then they would promote fear as to if we don't stop these things, if we don't criminalize it, then Ghana is going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. So they keep using text inside their religious books to promote homophobia, and the media is where they do this. So we have also attempted to change narratives. It's all part of the resilience building. So aside the press releases, there have been media interviews. So now you see a lot of queer people appearing in media spaces. It's not about only on phone or online. Some walk into television studios, radio studios to conduct interviews. Some time ago, people would not dare do that because you fear that by the time you walk out of the studio, there will be people holding stones and sticks waiting for you at the gate. So now people are resisting, and we are trying to do whatever we can to change narratives. And there have been opinion pieces by queer or feminist and then progressive people online. Now we can have a piece dispelling some kind of a myth about the community, or maybe having an opinion on a law that criminalizes same-sex relationships and other things. There are a lot of things going on that are helping us to be resilient as a community. And also, there have been, when it comes to advocacy and our issues, in the past we used to, because there was lack of locally produced research or studies, it was difficult to even convince someone that maybe queer has always existed in Africa, or maybe we face abuse, or we do experience these attacks, or these are issues, these are our problems, or we don't have access to health, we don't have access to education, we face challenges when we apply for employment. So now there have been a lot of studies, research conducted by queer organizations locally, and this is also part of our resilience building that we are engaging in. Recently, there was one done by LGBTQ organizations, a trans organization called the Alliance for Dynamics Initiatives, the Sisters of the Hearts, Courageous Sisters Ghana, and then One Love Sisters Ghana. They conducted a a study titled, I think, is it mapping the needs of LGBTQ women and trans people in Ghana. This is one of the things that we are also doing to be resilient. We are conducting studies so that if tomorrow we are in a space and then we begin to speak about our issues and someone asks us, have you conducted any study? Have you published anything? Some of these studies or publications can be used to defend the community. And it's all helping us to be resilient in this homophobic and hostile environment. And some organizations have also published books to help educate our community members. And these books have been done in a way to fit our local context, so that if anyone picks the book, the person will know that the book was developed and printed in Ghana. It's also helping us to be resilient, to have our own educational resources for our activities. And there have been, even though we don't do it publicly, we do celebrate Pride and Idahood. So it is also part of our resilience. We know it's hostile, but it's mostly done at private and safe locations. And this shows how resilient that we are. We know it is homophobic, but we do it here anyway. And there have been some kind of an emerging movement after all of whatever is going on. There have been an emerging movement, and that is what terrifies these homophobes that put together this bill. When you read the bill, they begin to make a case, or their cases using events that happened this year. So they have seen a visible movement that is emerging, and they feel threatened. That's why they want to put together a bill. And today we just learned about less than 2 hours ago that the bill has been gazetted, and Monday it will be officially introduced to Parliament, and it will have the first reading and then sent to a committee, appropriate committees, to start the process of getting the bill passed. And these are things that they have seen. So our resilience are something that they have seen, and then they feel threatened because the movement only got stronger. In the past, it was all about when they see anything. For example, there have been events in 2006 or so, when there was an alleged gay conference to be held in Ghana. The then president, Kufuor, made statements and then banned that conference. And it
ILGA
went
conference.
No, not that ILGA conference. There were other ones that were, yes, this is many years ago, that was going to be held. But then the president then, that's President Kufuor, banned that conference from happening because there was a lot of outrage. And then he mostly, what happens here is that when they see an issue, they force the president that you are the father of the country, you're the father of the land, the first gentleman of the land. So you have to make your stance known. So the president's stance was considered as the law. When the president speaks that we are not going to allow this, it was considered as the law. But then homophobes, and with the World Congress of Families coming in 2019, they felt that these statements were not enough. And then they had to produce a bill, because anytime—
Institutionalize this homophobic attitude.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they always had this thing. And then in 2011, there was a statement by the then British Prime Minister, David Cameron, when he said that if countries didn't recognize or respect gay rights, then they would risk being cut off funding for donor support from the UK. It was met with backlash. And then the late president—
And on that note, Yeah, and on that note, when you bring in like the international community, right, the regional organizations, stuff, Wendy was talking about it. Again, thank you, Danny. But Wendy, again, I want you to link this aspect, right, between the local and the international, right, and the regional and all that stuff. So Wendy, you hold a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University, and you hold a master's degree in international law, focusing on transnational justice and the rule of law from the University of Ulster in Northern Ireland. So basically, not only you're a feminist lawyer and a researcher in Human Rights Watch, but you also tapped into academia as an adjunct professor of human rights and gender at the City University of New York, and worked as a consultant with international and regional organizations such as the UN, right? And intergovernmental agencies such as the African Commission, which you currently stated that you were working with them, interviewing the 21 activists with regards to their experience with detention and legal prosecution. So you have only literally one thing to do: run for office. I'll support you in any way we can. And I really admire your work. And on that note, when we were talking about Danny and having the international support, given your extensive experience, what is your take about Ghana's constitutional commitments to human rights, let alone the regional and the international treaties that guarantee the rights to freedom of assembly, of speech, of association, of expression, everything that basically the African Charter basically provides, all of which that Ghana has ratified and is bound to uphold? Are there any viable recourses for those organizations and international community to hold the Ghanaian government accountable and in a way, I don't want to force them, but basically bind and translate those rules into local practices and regulations towards the LGBT communities?
Thank you, Jesse, for that very nice introduction. I appreciate it. So, a couple of things. Let me just go back to the report that we published in 2018. What I failed to mention was that I interviewed 114 Ghanaians who self-identify as LGBT. I tried to cover many cities. I ended up doing interviews in Accra, Tamale, Kumasi, and the Cape Coast. So we tried to, I mean, obviously we didn't cover the entire country, but I tried to we tried to do as much as possible. When we published the report, we made extensive recommendations to Parliament, to the Ghanaian Parliament, to the Ghanaian President, and also to the UN. The report, for those who are interested, is available on our website, on the Ghana page. So yeah, you can have access to that. One of the recommendations we made, and I want to connect it to your question, right? One of the recommendations we made to the President was to extend an official invitation to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, in fact, specifically the country rapporteur for Ghana, in order to engage with the government and to engage with the LGBT community, with the view to hopefully repealing this provision in the Criminal Offences Act. Now, what we often do as HRW, when we before we publish the report, we always send an embargoed version to relevant actors in government so that they can see what we have found, how we've investigated, and the international commitments, both under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and every single treaty that they've ratified at the UN level. We did not receive a response from the President's office. The only response we did receive was from the police, which we found quite surprising, and we welcome that a lot, because rarely do we receive official responses that we can publish with our reports. So again, I want to emphasize that at a high level, there's a level of commitment within the police system to ensure protection of LGBT people. In fact, now when I was in Ghana, I managed to have a sit-down meeting with the High Commissioner for Police in Accra. I also had a sit-down meeting with the head of the crime unit in the Volta region. So it comes across as a desire to do the right thing from some sectors, right? Now, in terms of the African human rights system, or the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, there's a couple of things. When the 21 individuals were arrested, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders issued a statement condemning the arrest, because I mean, it's unlawful and it's arbitrary. What Ghanaian activists could potentially or should be thinking about now that they have the bill, they have the text, and the 21 are still kind of in the criminal justice process, is to file what we call a request for the commission to issue an urgent letter of appeal to the government of Ghana, calling for the charges to be dropped against the 21, but also calling on them to drop the bill or not to pass it. So that's one avenue with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We will be talking to, as HRW and other organizations outside of Ghana, we will be talking to the Ghanaian activists to see if they need any support or if we can provide any technical support to them to be able to do this. The UN independent expert on SOGI issued, together with other rapporteurs, issued a statement when the 21 were arrested as well. Now, we can also do a follow-up with the UN independent expert. I believe Danny, who's always on social media, routinely tags him on Twitter. So he's quite aware, or at least I want to assume, that he's quite aware of the developments around the bill as we speak. So that's
Hashtag is the 21, right, Wendy?
Sorry, say that again.
It was the hashtag release the 21.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, we have the rapporteur on SOGI at the UN. That's an expert that should and must be engaged in relation to this. I mean, for me, Ghana's coming up for UPR next year. That's another process within the UN system that they can engage and make sure that it comes to the attention of member states. Now, in terms of international support, the UK issue was raised. Danny and I had the opportunity to meet with several missions. We met with the UK, Canada, the Canadian mission, the deputy head of mission for the EU, the Netherlands, and Germany, to raise the issue, to request their support or figure out what they can do from a diplomatic perspective, whether it's in private meetings with the government or in private meetings with members of parliament. My sense, or the takeaway from that meeting, was that it was very clear that at that time, of course, I don't know if they'll change their minds, but it was very clear that they're not going to come out publicly condemning the arrest of the 21. Now that the bill is out, it's not clear if they will make any public comments around the bill. So that's from the diplomatic side. We have been in conversation with Ghanaian activists, both Robert and Danny have brought this up with them, that I think we also need to be talking to African governments who may be able to support. Now, the question is, which African governments should be approached? Because, I mean, we're living on a continent where most countries criminalize same-sex conduct. And then the question becomes also, which African governments will Ghana listen to? Now, what we've learned is that if it's an African government, they will only listen to Nigeria. So that's a non-starter already, right? We wouldn't want the Nigerians to intervene. We will be developing a plan to reach out to governments in Southern Africa. And maybe if they come together, Botswana, Lesotho, South Africa, of course, and maybe one or two others, if they come together as a collective to engage the president and to engage parliament, there may be some success there. Again, I mean, as a South African myself, I'd be reluctant to only push South Africa to go for this, because it would look like we're trying to import this issue into Ghana.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to conclude, what we will be working on as Human Rights Watch is what we call a Presser Plus, a shorter report on the arrest of the 21, on the conditions of detention. We'll also be thoroughly studying the bill, and I hope to put out an op-ed next week on the bill. Yeah, so those are the two things for now. And I will be returning to Ghana maybe in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Thanks, Jesse.
Hopefully with some good news, not a new bill that
and hopefully it
even
will be
further.
passed. Right. I mean, hopefully it, before the bill is passed, because then my work in Ghana would be, I mean, to be a criminal offense.
For sure. And on that note, when you're talking about connecting with regional members, state members, Dr. Maria Rees, you're an academic and a research associate at the Center for Conflict Studies at the Phillips University, Marburg. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I see that you're currently, heading a project named LGBTQI plus rights in multi-level governance systems, focusing on Eastern and Southern African nations. The other side. So basically your focus particularly was on Botswana, South Africa, such as Wendy stated, and Tanzania. So given your insights on the LGBTQ plus rights in the Eastern and Southern African context, what sorts of connection and variances could you draw on from this case in Ghana that is happening and unfolding with regards to this cultural relativism about sexual orientation, this foreign threat that is coming and threatening their way of lives, and how religion is playing a bigger role within the community with leading misinformation, recruiting people to go commit more violence and whatnot, and how that relates to anti-gender policies, government discrimination, and arbitrary arrest of LGBTQ plus human rights defenders.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me and for opening this space. And thank you so much for the other panelists for sharing their insights. I want to discuss some national and regional aspects from Eastern and Southern Africa. I will do this along the lines of variances and connections, and there are many, as we will see. I want to start with an initial thought, which is illustrated by the merging, cracking flags that you see here that were used for the fire. The image illustrates the forced literal distortion of identities of people. When talking about the rights of LGBTIQ plus people in African countries, there is a common narrative fostered. It was already the right presentation. There's a common narrative fostered by the actors who seek to restrict the rights and freedoms of people who belong to the LGBTIQ plus community, namely that homosexuality and any deviation from cisgendered and heterosexuality is un-African, un-Ghanaian, and then enter country X. Thus splitting up the identities of LGBTIQ plus Africans, I'll leave it as in general for now, and taking from the people who live this reality part of their identity. And this is obviously hurtful on many different levels. For one, on the individual level, LGBTIQ plus activists such as Nigerian Bisi Alimi have pointed this out. It's also highly problematic, to say the least, on a more structural macro level, when enshrined in the legislation of the countries and integrated in the stories told by policymakers. These laws and norms continue colonial and post-colonial dynamics more than anything else. And this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but I'll elaborate this further. And please go to the next slide. This map is part of a world map displaying the laws concerning sexual orientation worldwide, from constitutional protection in dark blue to life sentences in prison in red, and death penalty in dark or red brownish. I already zoomed in on the African continent for a discussion here. A lot of times the legal repercussions include criminalization of same-sex sexual acts between men with prison sentences, and Robert has spoken to this already a bit. That does not mean that lesbian and bisexual, cis and trans women are not affected by the de facto and de jure discrimination. Actually, quite the opposite. Lesbian, bisexual, cis and trans Black women and women of color are most at risk of and affected by acts of physical and psychological violence. Pointing to dynamics of discrimination that have to do with intersecting identities. Obviously, the legal frameworks are very diverse, and these are complex dynamics and systems of norms and laws which are deeply intertwined. There is a common denominator, and this has been also named, and I want to talk about this a little bit more here. The common denominator is the colonial imprint and legacy of these legal practices. Most of the laws criminalizing consensual same-sex adult interactions are based on colonial legal practices and were injected in the legal texts. No, please go back to the other slide. They even made it into the new constitutions, in some new constitutions, like in Kenya in 2010, and pressure here came inter alia from religious right groups based in the US, and we've heard previous panelists talk about this as well. Often these laws are then framed as truly African or enter country XYZ, and protecting African citizens from imported homosexuality or anything diverging from heteronormative sexual orientations, cis-binary gender identities. In the same logic, then homosexuality or anything diverging from heteronormative concepts of sexual orientation and or cisgender identity are framed as un-African, and that Africans do not support LGBTQ plus rights and freedoms. Yet there is a multitude of literature illustrating non-binary and non-heterosexual heteronormative relationships all over the continent, predating, but actually also surviving colonial violence. The narrative of un-Africanness and homosexuality as an imported practice is often how upholding these laws and police brutality against LGBTQ plus people is justified in return. This makes advocacy work difficult, as we've also heard when we're talking about looming accusations of being infiltrated, financed from the West. This is a narrative that is usually also invoked by President Museveni of Uganda, former President Magufuli of Tanzania, especially during election times, to crack down on NGOs and scapegoating. Another narrative that comes along with this and is related is that rights for LGBTQ plus people are fostered by and fostering neo-imperialism of the West that is exerting an undue influence in internal matters. Prominently again here, the Ugandan parliament is tabling a law again and again, introducing even harsher penalties for homosexuality. And in 2014, some of the Scandinavian countries froze their economic cooperation. Museveni then largely used the notion of neo-imperialism for this intervention by Scandinavian donors. Another dynamic of this is the role of US evangelists. This became visible in Uganda and Kenya especially. As Ugandan lesbian rights activist Claire Byangubara said, US evangelists, and or I quote, US evangelists have lost the fight against homosexuality back home, and they believe that Africa is ground zero for them to remain relevant and push the anti-gay lobby, literally and to the point referring to settler colonial practices. They have had a huge impact on lawmaking in the bill, and related to this, and this has also been pointed out, is the practice an extremely violent impact of conversion therapy. Tanzania has, similar to Uganda, made headlines with regards to its anti-LGBTIQ plus politics and politicians, like the Regional Commissioner of Dar es Salaam introducing a task force to find and prosecute LGBTIQ plus people. This was in November 2018, but this is not a new phenomenon in Tanzania. On the other hand, there are examples of countries where individuals, NGOs, policymakers are pushing against these narratives and laws. In 2019, the High Court of Botswana legalized same-sex sexual relations, which was prohibited based on a law from 1965, based on British Commonwealth law. In 2016, the NGO Relativism was able to register. In 2017, the High Court strengthened the rights of transgender persons and to change their civil status officially after gender-affirming surgeries. And this obviously did not happen in a vacuum, but is the outcome of relentless year-long national and transnational activism. Now, please go to slide 3. I'll make a brief third point with regards to the regional level. when I talk about the regional level, this is the level intersecting between the national and the international. And the African continent, there are many regional organizations. These are the ones recognized by the African Union. ROs are usually defined as organizations in which at least 3 contiguous states cooperate and integrate in more than one policy field on the supranational regional level. There are 3 aspects within these ROs that are usually relevant when we talk about rights for, or also other aspects, but specifically now rights for LGBTIQ plus people and advocating for these rights. These are regional courts, regional parliaments, and institutionalized civil society engagement. Turning very briefly to the Southern African Development Community, the SADC, there are spaces for civil society organizations and activists to meet at the regional level, the so-called Southern African Civil Society Forum. For example, at the forum in 2015, trade union and church representatives blocked any mention of LGBTIQ plus issues from the joint civil society statement, rendering them invisible and taking them basically out of the conversation. Also in subsequent joint statement, issues of LGBTIQ plus persons were not addressed. They did, however, advocate for a regional court and a real parliament. That is because the SADC theoretically has a court here called tribunal, but it has not been functioning. It was suspended in 2010. The SADC Parliamentary Forum is basically a forum to uphold human rights and good governance, include non-state actors, and make integration people-centered. Yet, as we see, some people are included in this and some aren't, and we could even say they're made invisible. So also the SADC has a gender mainstreaming strategy already since the early 90s. But this is largely heteronormative and reproducing the system with a C. When we look at the EAC, that's the East African Community, the case of the Ugandan Anti-Homosexuality Act that I briefly referenced before is instructive. So after it was enacted in 2014, a few months later, it was overturned on a technicality by the Ugandan Constitutional Court. 2016, it was taken to the East African Court of Justice, that is the regional court of the EAC, which was originally actually designed to encompass human rights jurisdiction. However, this was never operationalized. With regards to this case, the EACJ was hesitant and finally ruled against the applicants, which were the Human Rights Awareness Promotion Forum. The court declared they was not responsible, and the case was already taken back by then, and it only considers cases which are indirect violation of the treaty of the EAC. Transnational civil society support was also at play here, largely from Kenya to the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. Unfortunately, this May, another wide-reaching sexual offences bill was tabled and passed by the parliament. It's now awaiting approval by the president. I'll stop here by saying that there are we clearly see these colonial continuities throughout different countries and regions on the continent with regards to legal practices and narratives. However, we also see, I think, a lot of transnational solidarity calling out this dangerous and hypocritical notion explicitly. Thanks so much, and looking forward to the discussion if we still have time.
For sure we do. Actually, Wendy has to go now due to her, she has an important meeting happening now. But definitely, Marianne, and I appreciate that. And this connects with basically one question. Looking at the map that you were providing and how ILGA is headquartered is in South Africa, and apparently, given that the accommodation towards LGBTQ plus community is much higher, how come when Wendy was talking, most countries refer to Nigeria within these issues? What is the role? Why the importance over South Africa and other spaces? This is a question from one of the audience member, if somebody could answer.
And Robert here, I'll attempt to answer that. Wendy mentioned the idea that Ghana would listen to Nigeria, just because, of course, we have so many things in common, and it makes it reasonable that Ghana would listen to Nigeria because, one, of course, we share the British colonial issues, where we're both colonized by the British, and therefore we speak English and that makes it more easier for us to have similar things. Also, the idea that it's easy for Ghanaians to coexist in Nigerian spaces and Nigerians to coexist in Ghanaian spaces. So there's this already existing sister and brotherhood relationship that makes it easy for Ghana to take Nigeria as an example in many of these situations, and also Nigeria to take Ghana in certain instances as an example. I still believe, notwithstanding, that Ghana would listen to various governments depending on the relationship that we already have. So I'm aware that
on an African context, but on a regional context,
yes.
Does Nigeria have more weight than South Africa and whatnot, and why? Why is that?
Nigeria has, first of all, we recognize the effort and then the size of Nigeria. We recognize the forcefulness of the Nigerian population. And then also we recognize the big diversity that exists in Nigeria that seems to represent a lot of people as well across the continent. And then also the presence of Nigeria in almost everywhere that you can think about. Exactly. So it becomes very, but notwithstanding, I know that the Angolan president is addressing our parliament soon. I think these are also opportunities where some presidents can also make some inputs there and here and there. I am also aware that, of course, the countries around us, the French countries around us, who do not have specific laws criminalizing LGBT, can make some inputs in this process. So the reason why Ghana would listen to Nigeria are those that I've listed, but I'm sure that if we have more voices from other presidents who have this law, who have an environment where they allow LGBT to be free, could be a good example, like Danny mentioned, because we have been, there's this erasure of LGBT people. It looks like it doesn't exist and it's not real. But if these presidents share their experiences with our parliament and with our executive, it will be a great step.
Perfect. Anybody else would like to talk about that before I make a comment regarding somebody asked about the size of the LGBTQ plus community in Ghana.
Maybe just very briefly,
Maria,
jumping in. Sorry.
No, don't be, please.
Just to make an additional point that I think is not in any way not in line with what Robert just said. I think the role of Nigeria within the ECOWAS is quite instructive in that way. And when we look at this map that I just showed, ECOWAS is the main and most important regional organization in West Africa. And within ECOWAS, to some extent, Nigeria is sort of seen as the one in the driving seat. And we have this in other regional organizations, obviously anywhere in the world as well, where you have these specific countries that sort of steer the conversation a bit more than others and have more leverage.
Others bandwagon.
Exactly, and I think this also speaks to that role without being in any way an expert on these dynamics. But I could see that this would also play a role.
Oh, for sure, definitely. Again, there's some, but again, what is like some basically, Danny, you mentioned the role of UK. But what about the other voices? I know the US provided a statement about the 21, but what would you think would the reaction be if, God forbid, the bill happens and materializes? Danny? I think that...
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so you were mentioning UK, right?
You mentioned the UK. I'm talking about you on a grassroots level on the ground.
Okay. So
what are you hearing from the international support regarding this bill?
Okay, so with the international supports, I think they haven't really released a lot of statement because it hasn't been officially laid before Parliament, and maybe after it's laid before Parliament on Monday, then we'll hear more from them, from international government, from donors that support Ghana in public health, and that supports our government policies, which we know our governments need money to implement. So we think some things might go on. We pick up some information that makes it look like the government itself doesn't seem to be happy about the bill, but there's nothing concrete from there because they haven't really released a strong statement condemning or opposing the bill, or even saying anything about the bill. That could also be because it's yet to be officially laid before Parliament. That's on Monday. So I think developmental partners and donors are watching. And with the proponents of the bill, especially those that are sponsoring it, this week they went on massive media campaigns, and it was all about propaganda. It was more about fear. It was about conspiracy theories that they were using to promote the bill in a way to gather bipartisan support to get the bill passed. And this is what they are doing. And then one thing that they said when it comes to donor support, one of them who said that Ghana would not be blacklisted because there is someone who is very close to the government and is a relative to the president, and he have been making social media posts that seem to suggest that, because this one is a government insider that was making social media posts. He's not a government official, but he's very close to the government and was making social media posts that these are people that want to get Ghana blacklisted because our developmental partners and donors would not be happy. So,
like many misinformation about the population, definitely.
Yeah, and the proponents of the bill have been citing other countries that, okay, Uganda did it, no one punished them. Nigeria passed it, they were not blacklisted, so Ghana would not be blacklisted. These are things they are saying, but they are untrue because they were, for example, in Uganda, I think funding for HIV or some kind of public health funding were not going after they passed that bill. And Nigeria were being threatened with sanctions. And with Ghana, because of how we positioned ourselves, today I saw a tweet, someone was saying that Ghana, the darling boy of the West, because we were considered to be more progressive than other African countries, especially when it comes to the West African sub-region. So if Ghana is doing this, people fear that maybe Ghana might face the kind of sanctions that others didn't face. And with COVID hitting our economy so massively in a way, and government spending has risen because they implemented a lot of social interventions to support the poor last year. And now they need that money back. So they have introduced a lot of taxes because a lot of funding was not coming. So they wouldn't want to have such a bill passed and then investment goes down from the international community goes down. And also with tourism coming in, because in 2019, there was a whole government project that was promoting Ghana as, if you want to come to Africa, especially among the diaspora, it was called I've forgotten the team they used, but
yeah, I remember the president was calling back the diaspora to come back
to come back to Ghana, and
definitely.
a lot of celebrities came
to
Ghana.
Naomi Campbell and those. Yes, I recall. But on that note, Danny and Danny and Marielle, there's this connection that I want to build, the transnational connection. One of the audience members raised it with regards to the Caribbean LGBTQ organization. As you know, even though you work on the ground, you have a lot of connections, right? Transnational connections with other LGBT groups across the region and across the globe. First of all, are there any transnational connection with Caribbean LGBTQ organization? And also, what are some lessons learned that you could provide, Danny and Marielle and Robert, especially Marielle, also with regards to other countries within the region, especially from the East African region. And we will close it there because I think we are passing the time.
Okay, Robert here. I'll first say that I would like to also add up quickly before I answer this question that one of the reasons why also that we have seen that a lot of donors and the foreign community have fallen back is if you look at the bill, it criminalizes it also frowns on donor and foreign agencies getting involved. And if you look at the reason, one of the main reasons why this bill is going to be put in place is the involvement of foreign agencies in the process. So if you look at the memorandum of the bill, it's written that the Europeans, the Australians, and all of that getting involved in the opening of the office, So if there's an attempt again by the community, by the foreign community to get involved in this space, it cements their point. That yes, look at them. We said that they would be involved, and that is what it is. Yes, we are connected on various levels with a number of organizations. As Danny mentioned earlier on, we were part of a project called the Pride Project that connected us to a number of organizations across the globe. So currently, we are working with the COC Netherlands and Pan-African ILGA to continue this conversation around how we can share learning regionally. So both Ghana and Asia and other countries that are on that project. Certain reports have been done analyzing the project because the project was implemented in various countries across the globe. So those lessons have been used. I am part of the International Advisory Committee of that project. And so when those lessons come, that is what influenced the development of new projects that are supposed to help with the LGBT discussions. I think that one of the key things that is also interesting for us is also for us to learn from the Nigerian experience. I see somebody asking the question space, how does this connect to Nigeria and Nigeria sharing experience? Yes, Nigeria, Uganda, we need those experiences and see what were done that we should avoid and what we could also pick from the lessons. And like you mentioned, when the bill is, if possible, if it comes to pass, hopefully not, yes, what do we do? I mean, we've seen what Uganda has done with doing public litigation. I mean, that is also another option to look at the constitutionality of the law. And so that we can bring it down in that process. So those are some of the options we have from learning and also from attacking the law from every angle as possible. And also key, last one to mention, to strengthen the LGBT community. I think that is a very key important thing because if you look at Uganda, if you look at East
and now
Africa,
listen to the fear tactics, exactly, the fear tactics that they've been using, such as the arrest and the bail issue 1, 2, 3 times, making people afraid to go out, that they should not,
Yeah. So those lessons can be useful. Thank you.
Yeah. Marielle, any last comments before we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe just underlining that aspect of transnational, regional, but also continental or transcontinental solidarity among organizations, strategic, legal battles. This is, I think, proven very insightful and helpful in the especially Eastern and Southern African context on the examples that I outlined. I do also have multiple follow-up questions because this specific instance of getting the international community involved, I tried to point that out in my statement, I think has these it's double-sided because it backfires, and in the case of Uganda, it was used especially by the president to create this narrative of neocolonial interventions, and then on the other hand, I mean, obviously from like a more activist perspective, this is creating solidarity and creating also international solidarity, I think has multiple, is very important on multiple levels. So and again, we see these like very colonial and neo-colonial dynamics in the arguments that are brought
The
before.
hypocrisy of foreign
And again,
policy.
absolutely, and the hypocrisy of using certain narratives to alienate LGBTQ plus activists and people who live, who are part of the community on the continent and in the countries.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. There's a lot of food for thought to think about from this event. I really thank you all for being here, and I hope this discussion, conversation will lead to further work together. On that note, I would like to wish you a wonderful evening, the ones here on this side of the world. This event has been contributed from 4 different continents: Europe, Africa, Americas, and the Middle East, Asia. So I'm super happy for us to be able to make it happen, and I hope to connect with you in the near future. Goodbye, everyone.